I know that many people are especially in the red with altcoins. That's why we're making this video today. We're going to talk a little about whether one should still invest in altcoins at all and how the altcoin sector will behave. And honestly, right now, some people want to quickly jump back on the bandwagon because they didn't invest a few weeks ago, but that's a bit foolish. The best time was on April 8th when the altcoins really hit their lowest point. And I showed you 4 spot charts of altcoins in our trading VIP group and marked certain zones where we said we would buy again. For SUI, that was this point here, and since then, from the bottom to the absolute top, we've already experienced over 120%, just in a spot position. At the current time, that's still over 80%. And you have to imagine that. That's just one spot position, and people have simply doubled their capital there. If you don't want to miss out on this in the future, make sure to join the VIP trading group. It's 100% free. Everything about it is in the description. That's why the best time was already. But now, of course, we can't travel back in time. Now we have to look at how can it continue? How will the altcoin or the crypto market in general behave? And basically, for the coming months, several interest rate cuts are definitely being priced in. Macroeconomically, we also know that the USA will start printing money again in the coming weeks and months. These are all things that are quite favorable for us macroeconomically. The foundation has definitely been laid for us in the past weeks. Now, of course, it depends on what really happens here. And based on the past, for example, we had an upward trend of 4.5 months in August 2024. In September 2023, we even had an upward trend of 6 months. If this was the breakout for Bitcoin, and we are now moving back into an upward trend, this trend could last another 4 or 5 months. I have outlined the scenario for you here. We could pump nicely until around November or December. That would be the timeline. During this time, we could really heat up nicely in the coming months. But this would also be related to the Bitcoin tops of the past, because we usually saw the Bitcoin top around October, November, December. During this period, we usually had the Bitcoin top, and then the bear market followed. According to time and data, it would be the same this time. Therefore, according to time and data, we should have very nice months ahead of us. Just because we haven't broken through this significant resistance zone downward is very, very good. We found resistance there. And in the past, you can see that every time we found resistance, it continued to go further and further up. However, it must be said that currently, we are not yet in this risk-off area. If the future volume increases, and we then come down into this green area, that's usually the time when we really start going wild here. But that's also the time when we especially enter this risk-off area with the altcoins and massive capital is invested there. That's the time when this money is also reallocated. That's the time when the altcoins perform really well. And here I've pulled out the chart for you again. This is the Bitcoin dominance, without including the stablecoins. Here we are now at the level of 2021. We are at 72% Bitcoin dominance here. That's only if you exclude the altcoins. And as I said, this is really almost the level of the last bull run. It shouldn't go much higher. It also gets interesting here when we see the drop, because when the drop comes here, we enter a risk-off area where people are much more risk-averse, and that will be the best time for the altcoins. So pay attention to the future volume. We need a lot of volume. There needs to be a lot of trading here. This really benefits the altcoins. People will then become really risk-seeking, and of course also pay attention to Bitcoin dominance. I have already shown you this scenario. This is the normal Bitcoin dominance, and here I also see it technically on the chart that we simply have strong resistance at the top and might test it again in the near future. But actually we should slowly start to see a decline in Bitcoin dominance in the long term. This naturally benefits the altcoins, and that's why today we will also clarify whether one should still invest in altcoins or not. The Total 3 chart is also significant because it becomes interesting when we break through the level of the last cycle. When we break through the level, the last upward trend usually followed. Take a look at this. Broken through here. Here there was really this last huge upward trend again. That's why this area will become interesting again. Basically, according to our schedule that I have shown you here, the next few months could be quite good for altcoins. We are not yet in this risk-off area where the altcoins are really going wild, but if you already find good quality altcoins, you might slowly start investing. However, you could wait a few more weeks. There is, of course, also the chance that we might see a pullback in Bitcoin before it continues to rise. I mean, in the long term, You can't go wrong with most altcoins here, because they are definitely cheap in comparison. But if you really want to take the risk, you could also wait until we have clearer signs here, until we really enter this risk-off area where people invest in alts when we have really high volume and people are significantly more risk tolerant. You could also wait for that. That must be left to each individual, because if you simply invest in altcoins now, you are speculating. But this other way, paying attention to when Bitcoin dominance falls, ensuring that significant volume comes in again, is the way that is significantly safer. The other way, if you already select good coins and invest now, is of course the way where you ultimately make more profits. I think one of the most important things is simply that when you invest in altcoins, you select targeted altcoins. There are so many with good narratives, unique selling points. Here we have a few projects that definitely cover good narratives. Yes, you should pay attention to things like this nowadays. Such things are more important than ever. It's just important to me that you understand this market a little better. Of course, all the money is flowing into Bitcoin here. Monetarily, we are simply not yet at a point where one would invest in risk assets, and especially altcoins are risk assets. You just have to imagine. This whole upward trend in Bitcoin was mainly caused by people like Michael Saylor and the Bitcoin ETFs. The really big retail. Investors haven't even been there yet. We should see significantly more retail than in the last cycle, and we have by far not seen that yet. When retail is really present, when we see it with the loose monetary policy, then the projects can also do 10, 20, 30 times again. Gala Games did over 3,000 times back then. Phantom did over 2,000 times. We will see something like that in this cycle as well because we will still get an enormous amount of capital into the markets. Currently, however, tight monetary policy, hence also strong Bitcoin dominance. This can only drop here. If we see the loose monetary policy, we have already had 3 small altcoin seasons in this cycle, but they were really small there, so that was always the time when Bitcoin was overheated on the daily chart, RSI. We saw small alt seasons there, unredites, but it wasn't really wild yet. What we have seen so far was interesting. In comparison to what is to come, however, that is still nothing. We simply need a huge overheating here. We haven't seen that yet. If we break through the purple line on the P-cycle top indicator, then we had a massive altcoin season. That means Bitcoin first has to overheat really quickly in a relatively short period of time. That's exactly when the money was reallocated. Then we saw the altcoin season. But all of this only worked if we had a loose monetary policy. Because with a loose monetary policy, there are cheaper loans, cheaper money, and so on. What do you think? What kind of loans does Michael Saylor get if we now pursue a loose monetary policy? That's why, friends, believe me, what we have seen so far was nice and good. However, I think this chart here is not that bad. We might stagnate a bit through the summer in the coming months, but actually, by the end of the year, we will definitely go up steeply because, as I said, the foundation is getting better every day. I mean, the 4-year cycle is nice and good, but it doesn't help us if the real-world economy doesn't play along. However, in the last few weeks, quite a bit has happened there as well. That's why I keep telling you, the foundation is being laid right now, and it really only depends on what happens afterward, because according to time and data, it should happen by the end of this year. And the way the foundation is currently being laid, it would probably align quite well time-wise with the expansion of money and so on.